Okay, well, let's start it officially now. This court just doesn't sound good enough. That's really unique. Anyway, a roll call. We're all here.
Richardson here.
More here.
Freilinger here.
Great. Public comment? Do we have any public comment online, Angie?
We have no one online.
Oh boy, we get to behave badly. All right, presentations, none, public hearing, service station, they've withdrawn. So relax.
We will have to open the hearing. And
Yes,
We gotta open and continue. Okay, the public hearing. CU-V 24-06 service station electronic message sign. Public hearing is now open. They have withdrawn, they were asked to continue the hearing. Is that okay with everybody? Continue? All right, we'll continue that hearing until January.
January 20,
Right.
January 20, 2025 at 6:30 p.m.
Walt,
I think you interrupted me when I was saying.
the 20th is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we are closed.
Okay,
7th would be the next planning commission meeting.
So for the record, it will be continued to January 27th, 2025, 6:30.
okay.
Great.
Thank you.
And now, stop continuing the hearing. I don't know whether, if I said close it, then that might be wrong. Okay, other business, housing grant, man, okay. Title 11.
Can I ask a question right quick?
Good.
It's my understanding that the lighting thing is still bouncing back and around.
That's right. I went to city council
Yeah,
and they had more things they wanted.
yeah. Why is it not on here?
It is, it's on the
Actually,
updated
it's been
agenda.
added.
Okay.
The one I set in front of you guys this
Okay.
evening has an update with blue writing, and that is the lighting ordinance.
Okay,
And that
Thank you.
I did not guess, so I didn't know that. Thanks for asking.
yeah.
Why don't we, is that all right if we do that now?
It's on there.
Let's do the,
It's right up there.
we'll just keep it in order where it is. Oh, it's on my new one here. Okay, we'll go in that order. Housing grant, technical assistance grant, update at meeting.
No one?
Would you all update us?
Well, actually, things are moving along. We actually had a meeting today. Everything's pretty much on schedule. We're getting down to the point of code language will be worked on. We're looking at, say, January, February to start seeing more of the written material. And then at some point, there's also another citizen advisory committee meeting on the 22nd to review some of this material. If I can recall from this morning's meeting, and correct me, Shelley, if I'm wrong on some things, there's still some discussion on building height. I think there is a difference between a height of a building that maybe folks want, but also the height of a building that may be necessary to be financially viable. There's, I think, general understanding that the idea of having 4 types of applications and reviews are sort of acceptable. I think the issue of ADUs and duplexes just need to be cleaned up. There are some other things out there, probably gets into a lot of detail, but at this point, things seem to be moving along rather well. And again, Shelley could probably add to this as well.
Yeah, I think that's accurate assessment. I would add a couple things. One, the deadline for the November Thanksgiving grant reimbursement, our initial refund deadline was met, so that was turned in. I talked with DLCD and they seem happy with what was submitted, so hopefully that will be right on track to get the reimbursement. And then on the updates from the meeting this morning, basically they, in addition to what Walt said, or just adding on to it, is they're pretty much just trying to get an assessment. They're trying to go through all the feedback and figure out what they sort of have a clear understanding that the community and the advisory committee wants and what they still need some guidance on. One of those was the building heights, because there's some talk that people are concerned it would change the landscape of the downtown if the buildings get too tall. But they also recognize that businesses and developers need certain capacity in order for their business to be successful and have the number of residential on top in order to sustain that. And so people want that, but then they're concerned about the height. So what was recommended today was maybe bring some visuals of other communities that have done this so that it would show how it could potentially impact what we look like currently versus what it could look like. And maybe that discrepancy isn't so big and people wouldn't, it's not what they're envisioning, perhaps. And so they're going to try to come back with visuals at the next meeting at January 22nd. And then also a list of just some of the outstanding things they're still needing some specifics on. And we're also going to go through the comp plan review that we weren't able to get to in the Citizen Advisory Committee number 2. We're going to get to that in number 3. And then there will be a 4th one added, which I think I mentioned last month, just to wrap everything up before it comes to planning and council. So,
Great.
yeah, everything's on track.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Next is the lighting ordinance. Who'd like to start, Shelley or Walt? Walt, go ahead, on the lighting ordinance?
Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I think the issue has to come, and again, Shelley could probably provide a little, definitely could provide some additional information, since both her and Ken were at the city council meeting. But I think the issue is with enforcement. How will it be enforced? And I think the other issue is if someone's going to register, I mean, everything here is complaint driven, but if we're looking at complaint driven, where do we cut it off? If someone's on the east side of town and they're complaining about someone on the west side, is that really a standing issue for these individuals? Or are we looking at other situations where it's really a next door neighbor having an issue with the light, or someone else who's next to a business having an issue with the light? So I think the matter right now is really enforcement, how to proceed. Excuse me. Shelley provided a list of issues that the council would like me to go back and look at. We can't have a hearing tonight. This is really just a work session, maybe discuss it a little bit further because we have not provided notice. So we can get back in terms of a formal hearing next month. But right now, I think the only sticking point, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the sticking point is enforcement and who has standing, if you will, to, what's the appropriate level of complaint to deal with some of these issues.
And payment.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
not payment, but the other sticking point is the city does not want to have to pay for shields on streetlights.
I thought this was supposed to be the Central Business District,
No.
It's all non-residential.
all non-residential.
Yeah, and it was specifically stated to me that they want to make it clear that if a property owner who has standing or resident who has standing is complaining, that the city would be helpful in helping them facilitate a call to PGE to either have that light adjusted, have a shield put on, or whatever the remedy is, but that the city would not be paying for that. It would be up to the complainant to pay for that. They want that specifically stated. And another thing that was brought up, I think even after council meeting, was if that becomes a obstacle because of payment, suggesting blackout curtains as an option for them. So that was specifically stated that they want to make sure that there's standing for the person who's complaining, and that the complainant is the one who pays.
Now, standing, first of all, I think rather than hand holding doesn't belong in ordinances. In my opinion, we will help you put in blackout curtains, no.
No, we won't help you.
It would
on that,
just
but,
say-
yeah.
It should just say, this does not apply to streetlights. Period. Because that's what the city council doesn't want to have any responsibility for a street light. None, zero, nada. And you can call PGE and say, please come shield my light, and for $160, they'll do it. And that's the route that the city wants to take. So I don't see we could put that in the code, Walt, of if your streetlight's bothering you, here's the phone number and the city will help you, and you might think about blackout curtains. I think that's silly, but I'm not a professional. Whatever you think, Walt. The next thing is now standing and streetlights are separate because streetlights are out. There is no standing with streetlights. So now standing, what's going to be bothering you? A light on the gas station shining across the street on that guy, across the street from the gas station. He's got standing, the shadow's on his house. To somebody down here. So maybe it could be words like, well, if the light is visible from your property. That's maybe a little too generic, but if the light trespass is on your property, I guess that's a way to say it. Now, Patty Perrin has complained about a streetlight change, and I went to her house and I looked around and couldn't see which one it was unless it was the one right in front of her house, but that's not what she was saying at city council. She's seeing something down the street. Now, whether she can demonstrate light trespass, I doubt it. If she can show there's a shadow, a shadow coming onto her or light coming onto her property directly from the source in a way that casts a shadow, I doubt it. So maybe it's just like the light trespass has to be on your property.
As opposed to just being able to see the light out the window, which is what it sounds like she was saying.
Well, we're not doing porch lights, so that doesn't matter. It's going to be business lighting. It's going to be the lights on the school. She doesn't mind the fact that the school has 3 or 4 wall sconces that shine right at the back of her property. I mentioned that to her at the meeting and she goes, doesn't bother me. But there's a street light out there that's bothering her. So streetlights don't matter. Public, now that's the problem. The school has several that are pointing out, and I think I pointed that out to the city council, and I took pictures showing that. I don't think they ever saw those pictures. Angie, is that right?
They did not.
Okay,
I have them
that's too bad.
in the file for them.
That's too bad because they would see, but that's going to cost the school district some money to go out there and shield those. If this ordinance goes by the way it is now. It's not a street light. And it is, you can see my shadow on that Victorian house from
School
the
district was here
grade
last
school. Pardon me?
The school district superintendent was here or last meeting too, so that would have been good for him to see that.
Yeah. So just to keep it down, I kind of expanded this thing to school, side lights, and it's going to be some expense. The city hasn't pointed that out and hasn't flagged that. So, well, do you have standing language in your mind?
Actually, I think you helped out a lot right there with the issue of trespass. In other words, just because you don't like someone's light is not a basis to complain. However, if the light is trespassing on your property, and we do have a definition for that that's very clear, I think that would be certainly a reason to complain. And I think, let me put it this way, I think it would have greater enforcement capability than just someone saying, I don't like the light.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I think the person is then impacted with the trespass as opposed to some sort of aesthetic judgment.
So, I think that's settled into it. We'll look at it when you write it up. So-
But not if, okay, here I'm going right back to the convenience store over here. So if they're not gonna impact very many houses. But if it's trespassing off of their property, then what good is it doing to have an ordinance if it's going off of it and nobody can say anything because it's not trespassing on their property?
What's the impact?
That's a good point.
But where's the impact of?
Is it just people driving by? Like who's
Yeah,
complaining?
Well, it's,
is it an aesthetic issue?
I don't know, because here again, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So just because it doesn't get over on Carroll's property, half a block away, doesn't mean that it's not trespassing. I mean, it's trespassing if it's off of that property.
Well, then
That's the way that's the way we have it written.
but then it would be trespassing on somebody's property, and if that person is concerned about it,
That's who complains.
that's who complains.
Well, but if there's no property owner around it,
Then who's it
Uh,
impacting?
huh?
Then who's it impacting?
Who's complaining then?
That's what I'm saying. Nobody else has a right to say anything. So they could basically have lights going clear across the street. And nobody can say anything because,
That would be going on somebody's property, and that person, and it's impacting whose property it goes on. So that would be the person who.
Like City Hall, for example.
yeah, but if it's just like the street, because they're on two, they've got one side that there's a blank piece of property and they've got two street.
Light trespass onto the street is kind of like a street light. So I don't think light trespass onto the street is a thing.
My motivation for the lighting ordinance has been negative impact to individuals' property. And so if it's not impacting an individual, then I don't see why we would regulate it. From my standpoint, from my standpoint, the regulation is so that I'm not, that source of light is not impacting negatively someone else. That's the only reason for a regulation of any sort, is to protect somebody else's rights, I guess.
And again, Sue, if it's lighting up the street, that's kind of a good thing. If it's lighting up City Hall and I'm not sure that anybody here cares. If it lights up maybe the
Larson House.
Larson
or the
House,
Mexican food restaurant.
and they might say, you know, we've got these light we like our open windows, we like to have that, and we've got this light coming in and hitting us, casting this big shadow in our building, they would have standing probably. And then if something happens behind them eventually, they would have standing. And the Mexican restaurant probably isn't going to. The lighting a sidewalk or a street, I think that's okay.
Okay.
But I see your point, you had me for a minute, it's like,
Well, I'm
Yeah.
just, but because the next, because it is partly that it's going over the property line, but it's also, so just as a for instance, so say the mill down here was not, and somebody built something there, and they had just as much light, but it was actually, there was actually a business or something, right, the property adjoining them. They would have just as much light as they do, but they can't have it
mhm.
because it's going on to the property around them.
I see that comparison and it is different. That the gas station could maybe light up the street and maybe even this building and nobody's gonna complain from this building, but
And nobody's
the
gonna,
Mexican restaurant might be across from our residence. And they could put the same light out and the residents would say, oh,
Because it's impacting them.
because it's impacting them. So yeah, it is different, but I think some of us are thinking that's okay.
Yeah, it's just by virtue of where they're located and who they're impacting and that if
Right.
it's complaint driven and they're not getting complaints, then.
Okay, so we'll nod. All right, Sue,
okay,
but thanks for bringing it up. It was a good point to discuss.
I think so.
Okay, streetlights are out, standing, we've kind of talked about, there was one other thing that was a little different. What was it, Shelley? That
Well, I'm trying to figure out if streetlights are out, does that completely take care of the payment issue?
Yes.
It does?
Well, unless the city is not the school district, the school district might be liable for some money if somebody complains.
I mean, I guess I feel like I'm just talking out loud. They still
Yeah.
wanted it specifically stated that the complainant pays for the shield.
Is that for streetlights though?
That's just street.
Well, I mean, no, what I guess if there's a neighbor's, well, I don't know. Well, other lights would be
Yeah.
required to be shielded,
The city require, I mean, the person that's causing the light trespass has to
shielded.
shield it. That's the complaint. If it's somebody's, if it's a business's light, not a residence. If somebody doesn't like how the bank is lighting up their house,
The bank has to pay for the shield?
yes.
Does that specifically say that in there?
Well, they wanna, Shelley's making sure that the city has really got belt and suspenders clear that if there's a complaint and a business needs to change it, it's not up to the city to pay for it. Do you think that's necessary to say?
Or to say specifically who is to pay for it?
Violation of.
No, that's just a violation, just like if you have pile of garbage on your front lawn, it's not the city's responsibility to clean up. It's their responsibility to go ahead and write the ticket out and see you in court. The property owner is responsible.
The
Right.
violator.
Right. That's a violation. They have to go through the process and make the correction. The city doesn't go in there and change things.
This is what the city wanted to shield from, was getting a complaint against them. They don't mind other people getting complained against, but not them.
Then do we need to make it bigger than just streetlights and say, oh,
Oh, well, now this is where I'm following Sue's approach about the goose and the gander. If we're expecting that the businesses to follow suit, I don't think it's out of line to expect the city, which is basically what, a public works building in City Hall?
park, the
Go
park
ahead. What's
had some lights that,
Yeah, and to at least follow suit and make sure that we're, if anything, we're setting an example. I don't think that's out of line. If we're not in compliance, in fact, one of the reasons that we did that whole 2-year sort of punt before everyone has to comply is to allow the city sufficient time to budget for any changes. So I don't think it's, well, let me put it this way. I think we need to comply with the rules as well. That's all.
I don't know that it's an accurate statement to say that they didn't want any of the city's lighting.
No, not the city. It was street light.
It was streetlight specific,
Streetlight.
specifically want, and I just want to make sure that this is addressed with the result that we just came up with, which is no streetlights, but that it was the complainant would be responsible for paying the shield, but that was just with streetlights. So
That's not even gonna be in the code.
in the rest of the ordinance, as it will be written, the violator would be paying for the shield. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, they're in violation. They
Is
have to
that-
correct
Is
it.
that specified in that though? Because that is different than what they specifically said, so I need to be able to go back and explain why it's one way and not the other.
no, basically, for example, a business does not have a shielded light and they're in violation of the code. Someone complains that the light is not shielded, it is trespassing on their property, then we can go back and just say, hey, you got to change the light fixture to comply with the requirements. And that is an enforcement action. So if we get a complaint, that's an enforcement action. And the person who has to take care of the light is the business owner.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. It's like any
Not
other.
spelled out, it's just
violation.
treated like every other violation.
Exactly. You're caught speeding, you pay the fine.
Got it, okay.
Not the cop.
Shay, on the city council, Shay did a calculation. He said there's 240 streetlights here, $160, that's $48,000. So the whole city council went, and I'm saying, hey, it might be 5, 10 streetlights, and they still were going. So that's what happened. So that's why streetlights are out.
Okay,
And the fact that PG will come do it for $160, it's fine with me. I mean, I think there's a remedy at least. I didn't know about the remedy when we started this. There is a remedy. That makes me feel good. John, think so? Yeah, great. Okay, the third, there was the standing, the payment, that's off because there is no mention of, need to make any mention of payment. It's just the violator will correct.
correct.
Right.
And the city could be a violator. And now this whole process is gonna take longer because as I was explained to me, now that this has taken as long as it has, the city council is being reconvened and they will need to start over with this thing.
Because it wasn't continued.
They're gonna have a different mayor and different councilors and that council is dissolved. And so this is gonna have to come up again.
So
Yeah.
now you're talking.
No, Walt, I see her shaking head.
No, absolutely right. In other words,
Oh.
that's why we're not actually looking at the material today. We're
Yeah,
looking at like just having the work session. The actual hearing will be in January, and then we provide a recommendation to the city council.
the
Then
city,
there's April.
the city council had this, they kind of did nothing from November to December. That was kind of on them. They didn't really make it clear. Anyway, doesn't matter. It's gonna happen. And it's in that process, though, I think since we have more time, it should be clear to them, I will say to them at some point, next city council meeting. So the city will be required to correct municipal buildings if they belong to the city. Got that, guys? You know, what?
Correct.
And if they say no to that, well, then we'll just kind of go, well, what lighting ordinance do we have now? Come on.
Because
gotta be
they've
an
got
example
2
here.
They've got 2 years to work it into the budget.
Yeah. And even then, it's complaint driven. The
Right.
back of the park is really shining into an empty field. When that gets houses there, somebody might go, excuse me. But until then, and if the people across from this side of the park, they're getting pretty blasted by the bathroom lights. They don't say anything.
And that
It's not
is
gonna matter.
actually 2 budgets because April,
Two budgets
Is-
and complaint driven.
yeah.
It's probably not gonna happen.
Yeah.
But if somebody is, it's good to have it in place, I think, if somebody's got a light coming through their window. Okay, are we good on lighting?
I think so. What I will do is I will put something together. I'm also going to run it by Shelley before we hand it back to you. So
Yeah.
make sure, everyone's on the same page here. And if there's some options to consider, I will definitely put that in the staff report.
Thank
enough.
you.
A year later.
Yes, Sue, I hear you.
And we'll work
Next.
on this next year.
Title 11. Walt, you wanna talk us through it?
Sure. I have no plans to go through all 29 pages, starting on a page by page. I did this last year and I'm gonna play my Santa Claus Christmas card here, thinking if we can get through the memorandum, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. We could start in earnest next month, but I'd like to at least get off the ground today and just kind of go through this code and just sort of hit the highlights and also be sure that there's some outstanding issues. Be very simple for me to go back to the drawing board and make some changes. So I think one of the first things to consider is why are we maintaining the Title 11 as a separate document? And I alluded to that, I think, on 2 separate meetings, so that you're going to be looking at a lot of code changes come, I don't know, April, May, June, from the housing and downtown projects. And then also we're looking at this issues with regard to land divisions, and trying to combine the two into one document really is probably a little too early in the game right now. I could see eventually working at cross purposes. I think the issue is also budgeting on behalf of the consultants to try to figure out how to bring this into Title 10. So on the whole, I think if we can get our land division requirements down squared in Title 11, we can eventually incorporate those into Title 10 at some sort of future date. So again, that's why we're sort of keeping these separate. And I think this will keep it a lot easier to focus instead of having three different groups go through Title 10 to try to figure out what else has to be changed. So let us begin. This is divided into 7 chapters. It retains the Title 11 heading of land divisions. And we start off in page 1 of the memorandum. It starts off very simple. We have a purpose statement. We're here to establish standards for land divisions, including property boundary adjustments, partitions, subdivisions, and replats. Pretty straightforward. That's the intent here. Applicability and relationship to Title 10. This is one of my biggest concerns, is that there was no connection between the two. So basically, any zone that's listed in Title 10 may be divided, partition, whatever. And all Title 11 applications are administrative decisions, meaning these are staff decisions. And by that, a staff decision, the application is made, staff will make the decision, we have notice requirements, and that decision may be appealed to the city council. In one case on partitions and subdivisions, the applicant has an option of having the case go directly to the planning commission. So I will get into that a little bit later. This is administered by the city administrator, and I raised that issue because that was something that the housing and downtown group kind of brought up, the consultants brought up in terms of who's responsible for, who's in charge of the code.
Well, excuse me.
Sure.
I thought you said you wanted to get through the memorandum tonight,
Yes.
and I see you on page 2 of the general information. Am I lost?
No, I have a separate staff memorandum that was submitted.
Each one of the stuff number, he's gone right here,
Yeah.
3 under review on the page 1 of the staff memo.
Review, number 3. Okay, I just couldn't find my place on this page. Thank you.
Okay,
I'm with you.
okay, no problem, no problem. After that, okay, scope of regulations, we just have the different levels of reviews. We have a provision on serial partitions. If you have a big piece of property and you just take out 2 smaller pieces and the rest of it can be divided even further, was a common way of doing that, but basically you created a subdivision without the subdivision level of review. We're just saying if it's that big of a project, it's going to be a subdivision application. Planned unit developments, there is nothing in here on planned unit developments. Everything refers to Title 10. So no PUD actions here. Now, interesting, on variances, sometimes someone will request a variance to a lot size, may request a variance to, whatever else, dimensions. Once there's a variance involved, the entire application goes to the planning commission. So in other words, if someone wanted to divide a piece of property and one of the parcels did not meet the minimum lot size requirement, that would be a variance, and that would be heard along with the partition at the planning commission level. We have a set of definitions that are particular to Title 11. And finally, there's just the usual provision. The city will charge a fee or may charge a fee for the application. Now, moving on to chapter 11.08, lots and parcels. This really talks about the design of the pieces of property. And that's all this chapter is looking at, how to design the lots. Each lot has to have frontage of 40 feet. Those on a cul-de-sac, only 25 feet. And that has to do with the curvature of the bulb area.
Is that the radius, the 25-foot radius?
That is correct. And that's why it's like the 25-foot for the cul-de-sac bulb.
Yeah, okay.
The rest of
great.
the cul-de-sac has the 40 feet, but the bulb area has to do with the radius. A private street is an option. If a public street is not feasible, in other words, the preference is for a public street, but there may be instances that that's not possible. For example, a real deep property or maybe some other topographic issue. You know, we just don't know what's going to happen here. We also have requirements for flag lots. We are discouraging through lots. We require the inclusion of easements where appropriate and prohibit lot averaging. In other words, every lot out there has to meet the minimum standard of the zone. You don't average the size of the lots. You want to reduce the size of a lot, it's a variance. The language eliminates previous references to townhouse developments and PUDs. All that was taken out. So that gets you to the lots and parcels. I will note this is pretty similar to what we currently have. It's just rearranged in terms of this new Title 11. Next one is street standards. Again, we follow basically the current requirements. We dropped all references to PUDs, and the street standards are basically the same. I expanded upon private streets and private easements. These are two different animals. A private street is just that. You will have like a 30-foot private street maintained by a homeowners association, and that provides access to a number of properties. It's not under city control. But you can have a private easement. For example, if you have a long parcel, you can have an easement extend from the street to the back part of the property, and you may have one or two homes using that easement. So the whole idea is that there are standards for both of these. I don't recall them being in the code right now, but these are options for land divisions instead of forcing everyone to have a street frontage. Again, this allows, I think, far more efficient land divisions for unusual shaped properties. In fact, a very difficult one to do is a square piece of property. You know, how do you divide that up? So anyway, those are kind of new concepts of a private street. We have standards, a private access easement, we have standards. The next chapter, chapter 11:16.
Well, I had a question on that.
Sure.
That concept. I've written here, maybe this doesn't what it's about. It says, so if it's more than 200 feet, it must become a private street because the city doesn't want to build streets for just one or two houses. Is that part of the logic here?
Let's see, just a second. Yes, in other words, we have an easement length of 300 feet, and that is a pretty deep easement. That's a football field. And
Yeah.
so the other thing too is that any easement that is more than 150 feet has to have a turnaround that's acceptable to the fire district. So it seemed to me that, how do I put this? We want to allow them, but not necessarily encourage them. If it's going to be more than 200 feet, build it as a private street or a public street, not just an easement. So that was kind of the thinking behind that.
Not just an easement. What do you mean when you say not just an easement?
Well, you can have an easement. In other words, you have a piece of property, you want to divide it.
Yeah.
And you want to, but it's not wide enough to have two frontages. So you run an easement along one side of the property to serve the back half of the property. That's an easement. That's an access easement. If I buy the back half, I will also be purchasing an easement from you, if you will, to cross over your property to get to mine. That's an access easement. A private street's a different animal. It is just that. It's a street, but it's controlled and maintained by the folks who live along the street. It could include curbing, it could, variety of ways of doing a private street, but you can place more homes along a private street, but you can't, and that's basically the difference. You have tougher standards for a private street, and you can place more homes along a private street.
And the homeowners have to pay for the private street, the paving.
Correct, and that's the case. I'm always a little hinky about private streets. My experience is once they're built,
Downhill from there.
yeah, exactly. Within 2 or 3 years, even if they're built to a standard, that's a public street standard. Once the potholes come, folks are complaining to the city council. Why don't you do something about my street? So we want to limit them if we can and avoid them. And that's why I put some requirements in there. You can have them, but there has to be some really unusual circumstances that require a private street or
Well, private street cannot be longer than 200 feet. Is that right?
no, an easement can be no more than 200 feet.
Who pays for paving the easement?
Property owner.
Boy, I still don't get the.
I have an example when you want to see.
Yeah, okay.
This is
John's gonna try to explain to me the difference between an easement and a private.
So this is right by my house, actually.
Okay.
So here's the new subdivision.
Yeah.
This is a private road that serves these 4
Right,
lots.
I know the area.
And it's gravel.
Yeah.
And that these 4 owners probably work together to maintain that gravel.
Yeah.
But that is not a city street.
Right.
So the city doesn't maintain it. And so that's a pretty long one.
And that's a private, you're saying that's a private access
It's a
driveway.
private road.
Private access easement. Okay,
So there's probably an easement where they don't show the easement on here on this map. But where this gravel is,
yeah.
there's probably an easement so that these 2 lots back here
Mhm.
can get past these 2 lots to get to those. And the reason they probably did that is 47 is on the back of their property and they can't get they couldn't get an access point on 47.
Right. Okay, now show me just an easement.
So this app I have doesn't show easements, but there's probably an easement that runs along here. So this little stretch, this house has an easement to get along this edge of this property here.
Now they're saying that we're supposed to reduce the easement length from 300 to 200 feet, so you cannot have an easement now longer than 300 feet.
200 feet.
Excuse me, 200 feet.
Is that what it was?
So I'm still not
So in
clear.
that way, case, that one's longer.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still not clear the difference between an easement and a private access easement.
Okay, private access easement is another way of saying easement.
Okay, got
It's an
that.
easement.
Okay,
Okay, a private street though is built to a better standard and also can serve more homes. An easement is basically designed for 1 or 2 extra homes for maybe a narrow piece of property that you can't get more frontage, but it's deep enough that you could put homes behind each other. And that's my experience, that's probably about 90% of the time that you're going to see an easement.
now I got it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, the easements can only serve 1 or 2 homes, and therefore you reduced it from 300 to 200 because we're making lots smaller and more density, and 200 feet is plenty to serve 1 or 2 homes.
I'm thinking that, and again, if there's an unusual circumstance, I would not be opposed to someone requesting a variance. Again, this is just, we can examine this when we start getting to the page by page. I'm just
Okay,
kind of laying out the options. Again, this is not, thank you for bringing that up. This is not a public hearing. It's just,
yeah.
hi, folks, here it is. I got it to you a couple of weeks before the meeting so you could look at it. Maybe I could answer some basic questions here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, private streets, better standards can serve a number of houses. Got it.
Okay. Chapter 1116 is the property boundary adjustment. It basically follows what we have now, but there was one significant change. In our current regulations, if you were adjusting, let me see, how to make sure I get this right. If the adjustment exceeded 10% of the total area of any affected parcel, it required that you review it as a partition, which just does not make sense. And so at that juncture, I just dropped that. I mean, if you're adjusting the boundary, and make sure both parcels or both lots meet the minimum parcel size or lot size requirements. This 10% just basically kicked it into a full public hearing as opposed to a staff review based on the current code. I'm just saying that just seemed to be nonsensical. So an adjustment is an adjustment. Okay, moving on to partitions. Now, partitions, we start off with the process, application, and review. These are what are called type 2 reviews. Oh, let me rewind a bit. Property boundary adjustments are a type 1 application. I will get into type 1B, type 2 a little later on in this memo. I put everything together so you could literally take out chapter 1120 and go through the entire process of making an application, what the review criteria are, conditions, etc. So I try to keep it as pretty straightforward here. The one thing here under application, partition's usually pretty simple, and I put in a little caveat that staff could modify the application submittal as long as there's enough information. And let me explain why in this one case, I think it's reasonable. More often than not, a person, when they get, or a family gets involved in planning, it's probably dividing the property. And if there is a way of making sure that it's simple and easy and I have enough information, something, a plot plan to scale and enough information on there, it doesn't have to be exact. I feel comfortable writing a staff report. Now, that still does not exclude them from getting a surveyor and putting a plat together. It's just a matter of being proactive in terms of helping out the public. We have a section on improvement requirements and how to process the final plat. The current code has these mixed together with the subdivision material. It was really rather confusing. You would have to pick and choose throughout the current Title 11. And again, the whole idea is to have one chapter covering partitions from submittal to the final recording. You could just follow along, if you will. Also, one other big change is that an applicant has 2 years, not 1 year, in which to record a partition. It's been my experience that 1 year, sometimes you can't get a surveyor out there. There's all sorts of holdups, getting a bank loan or whatever. 2 years seem to be reasonable, and there won't be enough significant changes that I think we, would force the issue of 1 year. I think 2 years is reasonable. The next item is subdivisions, chapter 11.24. This follows a very, very similar outline as the partition chapter proceeding. Again, I edited everything for clarity, sort of a logical way of looking at the submittal requirements. There are provisions for phasing. I don't know if that's going to be a real big issue for Yamhill. It could be in the future, but a provision for phasing. And basically it says if you're going to phase, you have to have adequate facilities to serve each phase and also extend into the next phase. It's really a public works and engineering issue. And you cannot use temporary facilities. These have to be permanent in ground. In other words, we just didn't want something jury rigged just to get a subdivision off the ground and then worry about details later. You got to start right from the get-go.
Well, at the beginning of that paragraph, the first sentence, the provisions mirror current requirements for the application decision criteria, except that staff is now the reviewing authority. Subdivisions,
Correct.
it's not staff, is it?
No, currently it is the Planning Commission. And thank you for pointing that one out, because I was going to go through type 1 and type 2, but might as well do it now. State law, this is what's called a limited land use decision. There are clear and objective standards. There is very little discretion. The lots are either the right size or not. They're either have the right width, the right depth, they meet the lot design requirements, or they don't. The streets are big enough, they make the connections with the adjacent properties, or they don't. And there's adequate facilities based on comments from Public Works and the city engineer that can serve the proposed project. So this is what the state would consider clear and objective. And as such, by law, these are staff level reviews.
I understand for type 1 and type 2, right?
Yes, right. Now, a type 1, we're kind of jumping ahead, but that's okay. That's okay. A type 1 application is for a property boundary adjustment. The owner or owners come in, make an application, I review it, and then the decision is mailed out to the applicant, and that's it. No adjacent property owners. It's just very straightforward. It's again totally non-discretionary, and the only people really impacted are the two owners who want to adjust the boundary to put the old oak tree on one side versus the other. A partition and subdivision are also staff reviews, but they are what's called a type 2. A type 2 review is where an application is made. Once it's deemed complete, notice of the application is mailed out to property owners within, I forgot, I think it's like 300 feet. Again, that it's in the code language. It is mailed out to owners within a certain distance. They have a time period of 14 days in which to submit comments. At the end of the 14th day, staff will then take the application, all the comments received, including from agencies, take those comments and write a staff report. That staff report and decision will go out to the applicant and anyone who submitted comments. At that juncture, there's a 15-day period in which anyone who received notice of the decision may appeal that decision to the Planning Commission. Now, there's one caveat here, is that an applicant has an option of bypassing a staff review, type 2, and going directly to the Planning Commission. Then we hold it like a regular Planning Commission meeting. Now, why would an applicant want to do that? They may know that there might be a lot of opposition or concern, and instead of having a staff review and appeal, just go right to the Planning Commission and save time. So that's the usual case that I've experienced. Staff cannot tell an applicant, the commission will hear this. That's entirely up to the applicant, but they do have that option. So again, bear in mind, any decision by staff may be appealed by those who receive notice of the decision. And when that's done, then it goes to the planning commission for review, and consistent with the process. If the planning commission turns around and whatever decision the commission makes, that decision may also be appealed to the city council. So it's pretty straightforward.
I think I understand a type 1 is a property boundary adjustment.
Correct.
Type 2 is a partition.
And subdivision.
Well, a subdivision is when I guess I'm having a difficult time with the definition of subdivision. I thought a subdivision was 4 or more properties.
You are absolutely correct. So the recent subdivision that the planning commission looked at, oh, I forgot the name of it, but south end of town next to the park, that would be a staff level review.
Say again, the subdivision what?
Park Meadows would be a staff level review, the 57.
Yes. The 57 lot subdivision that was approved by the planning commission would have been heard first by the staff as a type 2 application.
Was not approved by this council. It was by planning, it was approved by the council.
Right. But bear in mind, Sue, that's a good point. Bear in mind, regardless whether or not the staff does that report, that is still appealable to the planning commission, and the commission decision is still appealable to the city council. So in other words, staff may do the initial application. However, all the appeal rights remain, and that's all for the applicant and anyone who receives notice along the way.
So is that a change, Walt? It used to be straight to plan person for subdivision?
Well, the change came, the one on property boundary adjustments came down the pike with SB 1537 and also with replats. In fact, I got from, let me see. That's not a recent change. It's been in the books, but I think what's happened is that the DLCD has not gone out of its way to enforce it until the whole housing issue came up. And so it's a matter of clear and objective standards to avoid barriers for housing. So it's very clear that if it's what's called limited land use with clear and objective standards, no discretion, those are staff reviews. Again, it doesn't preclude appeal, and it doesn't preclude an applicant specifically requesting a hearing before the planning commission, just bypassing staff. Staff will still do a report, make a presentation, go through all the stuff, if you will. But the difference is the decision maker will be the commission. The initial decision maker will be the commission and not staff.
The initial decision maker will be the commission on what decisions?
Okay, let's say you came in for a subdivision
Yeah,
application, and after I explain to you some of the options, et cetera, and you decide, I think the neighborhood may not be very welcoming. Instead of having you review it on a staff level and make a decision,
okay,
I want the commission to hear it right off the bat.
I
Let's
understand.
not waste time.
I missed that, the instance that you were describing.
Okay.
If they request it. Okay, so this is a big change, and I'm not against it. I think it makes sense. But I would think some people that used to sit here on the subdivision hearings would go, what?
Yeah, because my question is, okay, so I'm over on the other side of town. And, I might have some strong opinions about it because of infrastructure, et cetera.
Mhm.
And yet I wouldn't even know about it because if I'm not one of the adjoining
In 300 feet.
300 feet, unless I heard about it word of mouth, that could have gone in without any input at all from anybody here in town.
You know, this is another example of, I think, the one size fits all approach that we have in planning in some cases. Um, it's like for larger communities like a Salem or Eugene, probably would not make a heck of a lot of difference. However, in a smaller community where there are issues like water and sanitary sewer, it can have those impacts.
Well, schools, all of it. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
we're really limited on all of this stuff.
Yeah, the one thing is that schools cannot be the basis. School capacity cannot be the basis for denial of a subdivision. Um, in other words, it's the thought that you have to have the pipes in place to serve, but the schools don't have to be built before you build the subdivision. So anyway, the thing is that frankly, from my standpoint, if the planning commission ultimately adopts, Title 11 here, I would certainly recommend to anyone with the subdivision to just go directly to the planning commission because this is a smaller community, people are interested, and let's save 30 days in the process and just go directly and have a public hearing. They could tell me, forget about it, we'll just have you do it, and that's fine, but I would certainly recommend that an applicant consider that.
Well, you already answered the question, why this change? And I was hearing it as this change only affects 3 or fewer lots as a subdivision. I thought there were 2 kinds of subdivisions. One was, the bigger ones were still planning commission. So I did not listen to your answer in the context that I should have. Would you tell me the reason again why this change is being made now that I understand it's all subdivisions?
All subdivisions and partitions and property boundary adjustments and replats are staff level reviews. This change is to make the Title 11 consistent with the requirements of state law.
Well, then, what are we talking about then? We don't need to talk about it anymore.
Well, I understand what you're saying. I just want to make sure you can appreciate the fact that the first rock being thrown is going to be at staff. Okay.
I think that's okay. I personally, I think it's okay. But I was just talking for the people that were sitting there wanting somebody to say, what about water? And what about schools? And what about
Right.
this? And that won't happen now at the planning commission level, which I am fine with.
The state law that changed, Walt, is it the clear and objective standards are staff level? Is that the law specifically that? is
Yes, limited land use decisions, and this is considered a limited land use decision because it's very clear and objective. That all goes through staff. Let me throw one other thing at you, and I hope I'm not going to be confusing things. Wherever you have a use that's listed as permitted and just requires a review of the site plan, your typical site development review, those have to be staff level reviews as well, because those are considered limited land use decisions. And that's something the other group is working in. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but I'm just saying, from my perspective, I feel extraordinarily comfortable doing partitions and property line adjustments, and I've done them for years, and they're real simple and straightforward. Subdivisions are another animal. I still feel comfortable doing a subdivision. I prefer a planning commission involvement as well, especially in a smaller community for the issues you've raised. And so from my perspective, I'm always going to recommend if this even has a remote chance of being appealed, recommend that they go directly to the planning commission. Also, bear in mind, any partition, any subdivision, any property boundary adjustment, anything in Title 11 that requires a variance, you hear it. Simple as that. This code, Title 11, does not cover variances other than to say, if it's part of an application, the whole thing goes to the planning commission. So you don't look at a variance, make a decision, then come back and I do the partition or subdivision. You look at the whole thing. So that's kind of where we stand with this one. And we're now aligning, if you will, with state law.
So you can't write it according to state law and add a proviso that it would then go to the planning, because okay, we know very well that that land out here at the other end of town, on the other end of Olive, is a possibility for another subdivision. And there's just too many people in this town that speak out of one side of their mouth and do the other. And have from all the years that I've lived here. And I'm talking about city personnel. And this subdivision should have never been allowed based on where we are as far as water and sewer capacity. And that's why there's been so much. So, okay, so we don't have anybody look at it and nobody knows about it except the staff, and they can approve a 300
I'm sure
persons.
that it will get around town.
Well,
300 people that do get the notice are gonna let everybody know.
well, there won't be 300 people that'll get a notice
So
though.
300 feet, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
300
there-
feet buffer.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying? I mean, can you not add that as a? It has to stay with just the staff.
No, please understand, Sue. The process starts with staff. The applicant has an option of starting with the planning commission. And when it comes to a subdivision, that is something I'm certainly going to recommend. Now, they could just say, sorry, we're going to start with you, and that's fine. And if it gets appealed, I could say, hey, I told you so. But, I really wouldn't say that. But
So subdivision would go from staff to us anyway?
no, only if appealed.
All right.
However, again, I really want to emphasize, this is staff report. An applicant has an option. It's an option, if you will. Instead of starting with staff, they could start with the planning commission. And when it comes to subdivisions, I'm certainly at least going to recommend that they consider that option.
Okay, and you're gonna be here 2 years from now or 5 years from now is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I can't guarantee.
You can give him a hard time, but it's not gonna change the outcome right now. You can be upset, but you're being upset at him for longer and longer time isn't gonna change anything. It'll
No,
just-
I'm not upset at him.
Oh,
I'm just,
no,
I'm just
upset about,
trying to-
upset
I'm
about
just
what's
trying
gonna
to
happen. It's going to
clarify if
happen.
we could add that to it. but
And he
if-
said no repeatedly.
Okay.
So, again, all the improvement requirements are here under this one chapter from beginning to end. Lots comply with the lot design requirements, and everything is laid out specifically what needs to be done, who checks it off, the phasing, when it must occur, right down the line. So you should be able to, or a developer should be able to at least look at the subdivision stuff and go, okay, I know what the lots need to look like, and here's what the streets need to look like, and here's the process to go through. So I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit easier for folks. One other thing too, just like that last subdivision we looked at, they had to come back for reapproval because they didn't get the plat recorded in 1 year. And with the subdivision, it's really difficult to get all the survey done and all the improvements in place within 1 year. So I've strongly urging you to And I put it in here that the initial plat must be recorded within 2 years. If you have several phases of a plat based on state law, ORS Chapter 92, all the phases must be recorded within 10 years. So that's state law. But that first phase has to be in the door within 2 years. Finally, we get on the application material.
Wait, well, before we get down to G,
Yeah,
back up in 3 above,
yeah,
do we have a master park plan?
yes, we do.
Okay, so we're okay eliminating provisions for park and recreational dedication because our master park plan, when we have another 57 unit housing subdivision, we have a park plan that will direct them to create an appropriate amount of park. That true?
It depends on what the master park plan states. Now, I sent out a request to Jason on SDCs for parks. I'm working with the assumption you have an SDC for parks, and that goes to a park fund. In other words, the way everything was written right now, you're basically circumventing your own master plan. You can go ahead and start adding parks willy-nilly, and either have them build it or have them give you money for it. But now it's a double whammy. The developer gives you money, and when you get a building permit, you pay an SDC, which is more money for basically the same project. You have a master parks plan that lays things out for where you want the parks. You collect the money through, folks moving into town, buying homes, projects. That SDC money is put in a pod specifically for parks, and that is used for capital improvements. It's not used for maintenance. It's used for capital improvements, buying the land, installing sewer and water if needed, building a fence, recreational amenities. That's all part of the capital improvements. And that's what the master park plan does, is lay those out. The way it's currently written is basically the commission or the city can just circumvent all that. And I've had an attorney make it very clear to me that that is totally inappropriate. So to avoid sort of a legal issue here, as each home is built, they throw in a bit of money to the park SDC, and that goes toward the park funding for capital improvements.
Let me tell a story about the development on the school property. I was on the planning commission and the developers were here, and I didn't know about the master park plan, if it existed or not. I didn't know about SDC's part of them going toward parks. And I said, there was kind of this slew and between them and the school. And I asked them to build a bridge and make a park. And they did. So that was willy-nilly.
I've used it.
What's that?
I've used it all.
And what?
My grandkids
Yeah,
have used it.
my wife says that park should be named after me because I was the only guy, I was the guy that put them on the spot. Now, I don't know why they were trying to sweeten the pot, or if they were just nervous because we were kind of, nervous about them, but they threw that in. And I'm curious where the SDC money went for the park plan. I'm worried the city is doing something else with it. Is it really earmarked for parks?
It is, and I think there's a large amount in there right now. That's why they're
Great. A lot of
updating
it came
their
from-
master plan,
A
so
lot of it came from probably that subdivision and some from this
from
subdivision.
each house pays $3,677.
Well, and a piece of that is for parks.
No, just a
That's
park.
the park.
Whoa,
Yeah.
wow, so
And then
we
there's-
got, wow. So I double whammied those guys. Like you said,
Right here,
by asking for an extra park.
Per service, that means per
per house.
house. Wow.
Wow.
This is not really a planning question, but when you say capital improvements, can things like improving the park existing park, upgrading doing capital improvements on the park, like
Through the SDCs?
Yeah, like-
Yeah, there's percentages that can be used.
it's like updating the buildings.
Yeah,
or-
different things.
And also consistent with the approved master plan. Well, let me share a story for the city of Sherwood. If you drive along 99W and you get into Sherwood, you will see these little art pieces, just kind of art sculptures out there. And what I heard from someone who used to work there is they would get very close to approving something, and either commission level or council level, they would go, be real nice to have a nice little piece of art out there, wouldn't it? And everyone kind of nod their heads, yeah, that would really be good right along the main street. And the developers sitting there, they had absolutely no legal ability to do so, but it was basically little extortion. Yeah, yeah. So basically, you have these art pieces there, and that was the way that the developer saw, well, it looks like it's going to be approved if I build this art piece. So, yeah, that was pretty candid.
Saying we should start asking for art pieces.
Yeah, there.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, Ken, it served a good purpose. It's just that it's
It's been
It's
5
like-
years, the kids have grown up and moved past play equipment since then. If I hadn't have done that, the money's still sitting in some coffer somewhere. Where's the parks for those kids that moved into those houses? Come on, let's get it connected to the neighborhood. Let's do a better job. I guess I should be talking to the city council
Well, there is a plan.
yeah,
with that speech.
okay.
A little town that I used to work at, when I started there, moving 20 years ago now, they had 2 parks. And then they did the big subdivision. I'm not gonna say too much here. And part of the land was donated as a park. But almost half of what it was a swale, you couldn't build on it anyway. They now have 5 parks. So in less than 20 years, they went from 2 parks to 5 parks. And they could do that in lieu of making the SDC payment.
In lieu of, put
Yeah,
a
so
park in.
either build the park or put towards, the money towards the city for future development. But what is happening is they're taking unbuildable land and making it into parks.
And you're saying that's a good thing?
Well, yes and
Yeah,
no.
no,
I mean,
it's not a
You
master
can't
plan
use-
thing, it's kind of,
yeah, you can't use the land to build a house on anyway, so you might as well let the people use it. So that's kind of what they're doing, but that's kind of falls in here, I guess, to what, that park that you got the bridge to.
yeah, the
So,
bridge.
yeah.
So I guess, well, it just seems disconnected. Where's the park for this? How's the community gonna benefit? How is that gonna have more open green space? How is that gonna have more open green space? Because of an SDC that went into a pocket and no park was put into that space. I guess that's what I'm worried about.
Okay,
Going down with no park in the middle.
well, I guess, let me see, would it be okay to let the cat out of the bag, Shelley?
Go ahead.
Okay, well, turns out on Wednesday afternoon, we're looking at 3 different requests for proposals to update the master parks plan. So money, the STCs that have been gathering will be paying for that. We didn't have to go out for a grant. And we got I think, a very reasonable budget. This is not, a nickel and dime project. It's a reasonable budget. We have 3 folks who submitted proposals, and we're going through a review on Wednesday. So I think this will answer, I think, maybe some of your concerns. The other thing I like about it, though, is that with an updated master parks plan, you got to have public input. That is really critical. So some of these issues that you bring up, like why don't we have a park here? Why don't we have a park there? This is a very good opportunity. I mean, some of the proposals I've been looking through them. We talk about, assessment on distances between residential clusters and the availability for parkland. So they can identify these new places that will best serve the city. So yes, that's coming down the pike. So there we go. So that might address some of the concerns. We just can't double dip.
Okay, I won't do that anymore, but I guess we still could.
Got a park out of it, so.
Yeah, get some artwork. I mean, what the heck? Go for it. Go for it. So basically the very final chapter is, I think we've covered the bases, type 1, type 2, and there's also a little provision in there is that we have permission to place conditions to ensure conformance. And I think that's an important thing to note. I cannot condition a partition to say, we'd like a donation for this or that or the other thing, or we want you to build a new fence over here or something. No, only as a way to enforce the requirements for consistency with the code. And in many cases, the conditions, for example, with the partition, you will submit a plat and you will do this, and the plat has to substantially conform to the proposal, that sort of thing. And it just lets the applicant know what the requirements are. So that's my first take, Title 11. I hope it gave you enough time to at least have a thumb through. And I think we should start picking this up next month if that's convenient for the Planning Commission.
Mm. 2820. 1128. Note here, I don't understand. Oh, okay. I guess this will come up when we get into more detail. The 112820 E, maybe we should just look at it now so I don't forget. 112820. 23. E, application notice. Okay, so I guess this was the notice about people. Yeah, notice. And I think it was the same question that Sue asked was, how would people know the notice? If you're outside of 300 feet, you're not gonna know about the subdivision.
Well, one other option too, and I could discuss this with Shelley and Angela, but it's very common for cities to put new applications on the website. In other words, recent planning actions. We had a subdivision submitted for this particular piece of property, and just like reprint the notice there. So that's certainly, I think, a doable option. The other thing too is that, again, I can't say I'm going to be around for 5 years, but I'm definitely going to encourage folks to strongly consider taking a subdivision to the Planning Commission. There's just too many outstanding issues out there. And even if someone really doesn't care who's the next door neighbor, they may act for someone else who has some very serious issues on sewer and water, et cetera. So,
I'll just make a note there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe number 6 is posted on the website.
okay, just a thought.
Okay, we'll get to that when we come back.
Would it be inappropriate for there to be a monthly report to the planning commission on those kinds of actions?
No, absolutely not. I think any staff report I do probably should be part of the package, just like updated information. So if I get a partition in there, pop that in there.
That way we'd see it every month, right?
Right.
Well,
If there's a staff
yeah.
action.
Yeah. Look at this, Sean. I'm just warning you guys, and I guess I'm gonna ask a question. I have a lot of questions, and I've got typos, and I've got calling the chapters by different names and reordering things. And there's not a page here without me gonna wanna stop and talk about it. Is it illegal for me to talk to you personally, Walt?
No, this is a legislative issue. I'm a little disappointed on the typos because I even used Word editor to make sure I was getting things set up. I'm a little
Well, these are
surprised.
my observations. You may say, no, it makes sense if you read it like this, and I'll go, okay,
Oh,
but
okay,
these are
got it.
just,
Okay.
these are just what I have, and I just have a lot of talk, and you're gonna be hearing me drone on for an hour unless we talk.
I
Upfront.
have, this is staff planning commission. It's not an issue. It's a legislative process. If this were a quasi judicial case, like you were looking at a variance or something like that, I really couldn't talk about, being an advocate for an application. But for something like this is legislative.
So I can call you, we can have a long phone
Yes.
call.
Yeah, you can call.
Okay, because that would spare these guys ears. And then you can take the wheat from the chaff and bring it up or not.
Fair enough.
Okay, great.
I'm
Can I ask
pretty good
a,
at that too.
can I ask a question that could be opening up a can of worms, and if it is, you guys just shut it down, but with regard to your concern about infrastructure and not knowing about a subdivision if you're not within 300 feet. And Walt, tell me if this is out of bounds or whatever, but can you write it within a city code that if something affects the city's infrastructure, like water, or something major like that, that it's a citywide notice? I mean, not
Well-
just the subdivision, but the infrastructure piece.
Well,
The impact.
interesting question. One thing to note that for a subdivision report to go out on a staff level, regardless whether it's me writing a decision or me writing a report to the planning commission, I always get comments from the city engineer and public works. So with the last subdivision we looked at, those comments, I think, took about a page and a half covering all sorts of issues on sewer, water, streets, etc. I'm not sure if you can just kind of, I'd like to think about it, but I don't think there's any basis in which to do it. I think it's really now, one other way that you might want to do it is require that the property be posted. In other words, someone driving by would go, subdivision, there's going to be a subdivision here. They will at least be on notice, or put that notice as part of a, website sort of thing.
Then the other way to notice everyone would just be putting it on our website, which is what you recommended.
Yeah, and the other thing,
People that do not.
how do you judge the impact? I mean, 100 homes, yeah, there's going to be some impact somewhere. A partition for 2 homes, I'm probably not, but where do you draw that line? Is it a subdivision for 20, 30, 50, 100? I think you start off with the input and take it from there. And if there's an issue, we can appeal, or someone can appeal. But I think, it is a limited land use decision, and we can move forward to the planning commission if so appealed, or if the applicant so wants.
I like the idea of having it posted. I mean,
That's a thought.
Especially
campaign
infrastructure right
sign
now,
things.
until we have more water. Then it's not gonna be, when we have more water, and then it's not gonna be an issue, but right now, with everybody so concerned.
Well, it would be posted when an application was filed
Right,
Correct.
having a sign.
But not on the property.
on the
I'm
property.
thinking,
Yeah,
well, that's what I'm suggesting, we should have it on.
And the city's responsible for creating that sign and sticking it in the ground and maintaining it.
I don't know.
Or the
I'm
applicant
just thinking
is.
the little-
Can we make the applicant responsible?
that's entirely possible. The issue is, do you have the printing facility to put up a 24 by 36 inch
Well,
sign
So,
and on a A-frame and also a plastic cover to prevent water damage?
Specifications on how it has to be posted?
Well, so the church I attend is in Newburgh. And across the street from the church, a 400 house subdivision is going in.
Northwest Christian Church.
Yeah, that's where I attend. So all they had was the little campaign signs up with a public notice. And
The
it
developer.
wasn't anything fancy, it was just sticking wire framed in the ground.
And that's fine. I see what Salem does here and it's so elaborate. My God. Oh, well, I'll just drop that part. But anyway,
Sign around here, people would
I
probably.
think people would notice it.
yeah, this is, I'm sure in Yamhill, there's a subdivision going up and there's a posted sign. Application was received for a 27 lot subdivision. The word will get out and yeah.
And where would we put that in our code that would require the developer to do that? Is that where we would-
Yes, you can go ahead and do that. I mean, that's not hard to do. Notice right now would just be typical notice for after the for type 2 would be the original submittal and then the decision notice. And if it goes up to the planning commission anyway, it would be the typical notification within so many feet and for the public hearing. So nothing really changes. I think it might be advantageous as long as you have I think a method that's easy to use and replicate to post property. It's just when you get kind of something elaborate, it gets a little difficult.
Do something like you do when you sell a house and you have to put it in that plastic container. and-
Right. Yeah. Bright orange, make sure that's really visible.
Put it on the website.
Yeah.
Future home of your new neighbors.
With that?
Future home of your new neighbors.
that would go in the 11/28/20 E, number 7, because number 6 is posted on the website. Number 7 is post a sign.
Right. And then I think the language would be posting per city specifications or something like that. And the posting has to occur prior to notice being mailed out to the adjacent owners. So, I mean, at least you don't want someone to post it one day before a decision is made. So,
Hearing.
put a time and has to go there. Excuse me.
What on the developer would be nice rather than on the city.
They're making enough money for some small little signs.
Okay, we've gotten through the memorandum and,
Thank you.
well, maybe, we could communicate by email, or when's a good time for us to have an hour?
I think why don't you just email me and we can figure out a time, and that's probably the simplest way. Or if you have stuff that you've scribbled on, notes and everything, if you can just go ahead, scan it and just email it to me too, we can be.
I'll send it to you and then you can look at my scribbles while we talk.
That's what I'm thinking. At least we're literally on the same page.
Yep. Okay, we'll do that, because I will get tired of hearing myself in this room when I do that.
All in favor of that, say aye. I'm just
I was
kidding.
fishing for a comment like that. Because I deserve it.
Well, me too.
You open the door, Ken.
Yeah, no,
I'm
it's
gonna grab one of the paper copies.
a valid door. All right, so let's see, back to the agenda.
Easier to read it.
Yeah.
Moving right along, we have now Information announcements, next meeting info we know is January 27th, which is a departure from the normal date, so is it Martin Luther King?
Might not be here the next two meetings, but I will.
You're great at that.
There you go.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm glad that even though you're traveling, you serve. That's great.
Yeah. Took the position and I'm gonna stick with it.
Good. Well, now it's time to adjourn unless somebody says don't hit that. Yeah.
Yes, I have one other comment. I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and best wishes for the new year. Ho, ho, ho. And,
Well said.
Well, and thanks for your patience with us.
are you kidding? You guys are a fun group.
All right, great.
Thanks all.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you well.
Okay, take care.